For the Los Angeles Times and The Envelope, I'm Mark Olson.
And I'm Amy Kaufman. Thank you all for being here. Nicole, I'd love to start with a question for you. So you said you related to the role of an adopted mother in Lion because you have adopted children yourself. How much does it add to the role when you have such a personal connection to it?
I mean, I think it's the reason I chose the role. So I don't know how it adds. It just means I'm instantly connected. And because it was Sue is a real person, I was able to meet her and glean from her, but also basically just I felt her. I could move into her skin easily.
You play a mom in this too, in A Monster Calls Felicity, and you're 33, you're very young, and you have a very old son, or a pretty old son in the movie. Was that a difficult mind space to get in?
It was really hard. I found it much harder than I thought it would be. And then I kept being really cheesy. You know, I'd do one take and it would always be way too kind of saccharine and it would be too sweet. And I thought, actually, mums aren't like this. They're quite tough with their children. There's sometimes it's quite antagonistic. And so it would take a few takes to kind of find that reality of that relationship. It was definitely something that it didn't come, completely easily. And then suddenly you worry, like, am I not maternal? Am I not being maternal enough? And you have these sort of horrible voices in your head saying stuff like that. But it was definitely a process.
And Asia, you faced an unusual challenge with your character in The Birth of a Nation, in that Nat Turner's wife is someone that is known a little bit about. There's some conflicting and fuzzy stories about her in the historical record. So how did you sort of pull those things together to create your character?
Yeah, that was definitely the thing. It was like the question of, did this woman actually exist? And a lot of the story around Nat Turner is oral history. So, there was debate, and that actually ended up being a really interesting thing for me, just kind of discovering what I could find out there. And in trying to read, because William Styron wrote Confessions of Nat Turner, which completely omits any notion of him having a wife. And then there were these Black artists called the 10 who had written a series of essays kind of tearing apart that novel. And in doing so, they had done research that found a really interesting newspaper article in the Richmond Whig that was printed September in 1831 after the rebellion occurred. And in this very interesting article detailing what happened in Southampton, Virginia, there was just one sentence that he wrote saying, I got Nat's papers off his wife Cherry by the lash. And so I've kind of invested my entire performance basically from that one line just to create her gravity, so to speak, where I think she lived, knowing that she possessed his papers, knowing that you had to beat her to get them from her. So just being able to read that bend, and I mean, this article was mind-blowing. Just the ideas that people were relying on in terms of how they saw enslaved people and relying on their ignorance. And so just being able to read that and knowing understanding that these people had knowledge of self, which was really empowering for me and gave it so much light for me, that I could really invest in and create the details around it that I needed.
So you had to just kind of cling to that one, you never
really
knew.
did, for dear life,
Wow.
for dear life. Yeah.
Michelle, as a Massachusetts native, I have to say your accent in Manchester by the Sea, very authentic.
Thank you.
That's a difficult one to get down. How did you begin with that?
Yeah, and people are very particular about it. And there's these abutting neighborhoods, Manchester by the Sea, Gloucester, Beverly, and each of the communities, you would go into these communities meeting, or I would, talking to people, and they were all very invested in making sure that it sounded, that the delineation between Manchester by the Sea was articulated between Gloucester and between Beverly. But these places, there's a mile that separates them. They're neighboring towns, but they sound different from one another. So it was really a process of spending time in the place and spending time with the people and listening and listening and listening. Oh, and when I first started, I said, Kenny, is there anything that I can listen to or watch or for this accent? And he said, yeah, big tuna. and it's like a fishing show, like on a boat with like all guys, all guys out like catching big fish. But then the really interesting thing that I found when I went into the area is that there's like the masculine feminine interplay in this particular location. I'd never really seen anything like it. Like the girls are really like guys, girls, and like I would go to these dive bars and there would be just as many like girls sitting at a table with their friends as there would be like guys sitting there with their friends. Like there was a kind of like coarseness to the language that like wound up being applicable to watching a lot of big tuna.
So you got into the local scene. You had like locals checking you, like that's not accurate. That doesn't sound right.
Oh yeah, no, people aren't afraid to tell you what they think in that area.
And Naomi, with shooting Moonlight, that was shot in the neighborhoods in Florida and Miami where Barry and the writer of the play grew up.
Yeah.
And what was it like for you to kind of like be in the actual place, that have that sense of place?
It helped me enormously, but you know, I shot in a very short space of time. It was only 3 days that I had actually to be in Miami to shoot all of my scenes. So I can't say I spent very much time kind of soaking the place up. So for me, the amazing resource that I had was YouTube, because that was how I was able to access clips about the area, about that particular era, because obviously it's in the 1980s. And it's an incredible mine of information, YouTube. You can find absolutely anything on there, because people go like, you know, into crack dens with their camera phones and record, you know, all these amazing interviews and, you know, things that you would never normally go and see yourself, but you can find them and they're all there online. So that was my resource. I highly recommend it. Yeah.
And now I'm really marveled the fact that you shot your part in only 3 days, and in particular because it was sort of time that was carved out from the promotional tour for the James Bond film Spectre. And I'm wondering, when you sign on to something like the James Bond series, are you even thinking about the way it's going to impact other work that you can do, that you might end up in a situation where you have 3 days to shoot a part in a film?
Oh, I never knew that was going to happen. And also I was never meant to shoot over just 3 days. It was actually because I had visa issues. So the American visa department, for some reason, just wouldn't give me a visa. And that's why it ended up being condensed like that. But initially, yeah, it was supposed to be 3 weeks. And yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. So it's a big difference, yeah.
Hello, you
yeah,
pulled
and
that
kind
off
of
beautifully.
shooting out of sequence as well. So jumping from older to younger Paula, back to middle Paula, just quite intense experience, I have to say.
Felicity, what was it like for you to, you know, you get progressively iller in your film, which I'm sure is a challenge physically, and you know, the makeup and the hair changing along with it?
Yeah, it was well, it was charting her physical decline, and that came from meeting women who'd had cancer and had the experience, and they were very candid, and they sort of spoke about, you know, not just how it affected them physically, but also emotionally, how it affected their relationships and their sense of self. And they just took me through as well, just how it affects, you know, just little details, how it affects your fingernails, and how your body gets overtaken with something. So it was constantly also trying to keep the woman within what's happening with her, because she's got a young son, she wants to be an artist herself, and she's full of kind of joie de vivre that she wants to express, so that for her the illness is just a nuisance. It's, you know, it's just annoying. So it was trying to find the humanity of that woman in the situation that she's in.
And Octavia, in Hidden Figures, you play a NASA mathematician in the 1960s, and first of all, how are your math skills?
You don't want to give me any math numbers right now. I will blow your mind with my prowess, my mathematical prowess. You know, seriously, I'll let you finish your question.
No, that was it.
How am I at math?
I was going to ask how your math skills were.
Well,
But then also just the sort of the research of that, and the fact that it's kind of a little known story that I think the movie is really going to help bring to a wider audience.
well, actually, I'm going to be really honest with you. I thought it was fiction. The story was fiction, because how many times have we seen anything about the space race, and never have we heard all about the astronauts, but we never knew how they got there. So that was really interesting, and I felt like such a fool when when I said to Donna Gelati, that sounds great, but won't people know it's not true? It's like, it's based on a book. And so doing the research, there's so little out there about the women. There's archival footage and information at NASA, which thank God for Margot Lee Shetterly. She did all of that research and basically put it into her manuscript. And I like to cull everything for myself. So it was really, really, it felt really restrictive to not be able to find anything but little thumbnail photographs of Dorothy Vaughan. But I was grateful that Margot had already interviewed her family and just basically had such a comprehensive piece about these women. And Ted gave us only the chapters that corresponded with our character. And let me just tell you, I'm gonna break it down for you. This woman could disassemble and reassemble a car, anything electronic. So I thought, well, I got to try to do something like that, to get ready for this movie. And I realized I was not going to do anything like that to get ready for the movie. But we were filming in Atlanta, and it was so hot, and I thought, I need my white noise. I need a fan. So production bought me a fan, and it was in a box. So I just thought all I'd have to do was take it out of the box and plug it in. I had to assemble the fan, and normally I would just call and say, can somebody do this and drop it off at my place? And I thought, well, Dorothy would put this fan together. So I kind of piecemealed it together, but by the end of the week, something was falling off. It was terrible. It was terrible. You do not, I'm not mechanically inclined. I am not an analytical mind in that sense, and we're very different. And I'm grateful that there are people who have that type of aptitude, but that's not me. Not me. Yeah, no, try to put together an IKEA dresser. It's gonna lean. It's gonna be the leaning dresser. It's just, it was crazy.
So bringing a story like that to light that not a lot of people know about, how much do you all consider that when you're reading scripts? Are you trying to tell stories that people aren't familiar with? I know Moonlight in particular, a lot of people have loved seeing, a film about the young gay Black experience.
Yeah, I think it's really important to, shed light on communities that don't often see the light of day. I think that's what's really beautiful about it. I think as an audience as well, you're really excited when you get access to a community that you've never seen before, a whole world. And I think particularly in Moonlight, you've never seen that kind of world represented on screen before, and those kind of characters as well that are three-dimensional, like a drug pusher who actually has a heart of gold and is caring for a child that's not his own. You very rarely see those kind of people represented on screen. It's really beautiful when you do.
It's refreshing to not see rehashed stories over and over again. I just looking around this room, such wonderful female characters and such brilliant actresses. It's just, I'm excited about what's to come, more films and stories that haven't been told, and, getting to work with these women, hopefully.
I'm thinking about all the films you're all in, and I'm realizing how many of them are tearjerkers, like Manchester, Monster Called Lion. I was devastated by all of these, and a lot of films this season seem to have that sort of theme to them. Do you think there's something in the air? Why are these emotional, cathartic stories sort of coming about?
See, it's so important to be able to go to the cinema and cry your eyes out. For society, it's a good experience. It can be cathartic, and hopefully it's when people feel that they are entranced by a story and care about the characters and connect to it in some way. But I think it's so good. At the time you're always a bit sort of when you're overtaken by something, but afterwards when you do kind of go to the cinema and just in floods of tears, ultimately it's a good experience.
Yeah. I think making people feel, I don't know if the desire is, you're going to go and cry, oh my gosh, with say Lion, but hopefully you're going to feel something, because there's such a desensitization now in society. It's hard to make people feel, and it's hard to get people in when they're told, you're going to feel something from this. But gosh, it's gratifying and I haven't had the chance to be in, I've done some life-affirming films, but I've done quite a lot of dark films as well, primarily because I've chosen directors who are really interested in the idea of examining life, and sometimes life is incredibly dark. But to be in something that's life-affirming and see people crying, but crying because they've been moved in feeling is, it feels good. As an artist, it really does. And I think directors right now, it's because we're primarily led by directors. Unfortunately, we're not directors. Who knows? I mean, you are.
Buddy.
But I'm not. But you are. But, you know, so they're making the choices for the pieces and choosing to put us in them. And there does seem to be this desire to make people feel right now, which I'm all for.
Yes.
And I'm also for examining from a distance or voyeuristic, I mean, many different shades and ideas. Shut up, Nicole.
No.
I'm passing the baton.
It's really, it's empowering, you know, to know that you can take someone on a journey through someone, especially something that might not be familiar to them. Like that's, like I was thinking, not a film. I mean, there are film versions of it, but like Death of a Salesman, you know, I mean, who doesn't love that play? But being taken on that journey with this person, you know, and just getting to see like where they ended up at the end of their life and how much they wanted, and this has nothing to do with any of the work we're doing, but I love that when, like, I haven't seen it yet, but I can't wait to see it. But when you talked about like watching someone go through that experience, especially like feeling like they're losing part of themselves and trying to hold on to it and save face in front of, you know, the child they've created and what that looks like. You know, like that's amazing to be able to do that and to highlight that for someone else that might not understand that or get to see that.
What about being on the other side, like in those emotional moments when you see, like, you know, there's a lot of really emotional scenes between you and Dev Patel and Lion. When you're approaching that and you see, okay, here's like that emotional climax on the paper, and do I have to cry? And like, is there all this expectation of people on set? I mean, how do you work yourself up for those days?
Cross out all the directions or anything that says, and then this like that's what I got taught very early on. Cross all the directions out, which I say
guarantee that
it won't. Anything that says she cries now or anything, I immediately cross out. That gets blanked out of my script because as an actor, the way I approach it is I don't want to have any result. I don't want to be aiming for something. I want to find things, and I don't want to have a template given to me that I have to achieve. So that's just my approach. So then I try to, you know, head in there, really open, having done an enormous amount of research, and even for a supporting role, because we're all here for supporting roles, which is interesting because you still have to do exactly the same amount of work, whether it's for a lead or support. You have to do the work because you've got to bring in the human being. And once you've done that and created the character, then you arrive and hopefully everything else just happens. And there's days when it doesn't happen. And you go, gosh, I wish I would have another shot at that, and you don't. And then there's days when it's just like, wow, I'm so glad that something happened that day and that was magic and done. Walk away.
Don't you guys think that that's one of the things that you miss when you prepare for a play? You have all of that time in rehearsal for the moments of discovery, that when you're on a set, most of the time you don't get rehearsal time. It's like 2 weeks, and then it's makeup test, it's costume test, and then you kind of, you know, meet and sit around and talk about the character for a little bit. But there's very little time for discovery. So I always go to the set early, and this is one of those things that's really funny because you don't get to spend, you had 3 days, you don't get to spend that much time in your location. So I like to get dressed, and I like to go, and I like to sit in the rooms and in the kitchens and in the offices. And production people get really nervous because they like to know where you are at all times. You know, it's like, we didn't invite her. She's coming of her own. You know, guys, I'm supposed to have been in this place every day for the past 15 years. I kind of need to spend some hours in here. So, but it's very different film work versus getting ready for a play. You have that moment, or all of those moments for discovery. You know?
That's so interesting as well about how little ownership we have over our space and our beings when we're on set, because there are these demands on our times constantly. So it means that the time that we have to prepare to get into character is so small, which is why I think the preparation that we do beforehand has to be so vast and so in depth. You know, it seems like, you know, you go on and you only work for a month or a couple of months, but it's not. There's a huge amount of research that you have to do beforehand so that you cannot be distracted when there are like 20 people in the room and, you know, they're all like fussing with your hair and your makeup and what have you, because you've got to stay completely centered in your zone.
And Felicity, in A Monster Calls, some of the most intense emotional moments are also, there's a lot of special effects happening, and I mean, because it's sort of an adventure story as well as an emotional story. And was it difficult to kind of find those emotional moments in the midst? I mean, I don't know if you were acting to a tennis ball on a stick or not, but is that difficult?
Well, we were just very lucky. Bayona, who directed the film, he's really on your side as an actor, which doesn't always happen. So he actually had quite a theatrical attitude to making a film. So we had that lovely thing of actually being in a rehearsal room and having a couple of weeks to kind of do improvisations and understand the characters. And then even on set, in terms of, because there's a lot of CGI involved, but as much as possible, he would have something that would be similar to what you'd see on screen. So we would be doing scenes with kind of a massive plastic tree that you would be looking up at, so you weren't having to do it to a tennis ball. So he was really on our side from the very beginning. He was like, I want to make sure that the performances are rooted and grounded, and I'll do everything I can to support that.
And Octavia, Nicole, both of you have started doing a little more producing, and I'm curious as to why that is. I mean, is it wanting to have more of a sense of control over the parts that you're getting?
It's strange for me. I just like that role. I'm a puzzle person. I'm dyslexic, and the way that I learn my process is very different, and everything is a puzzle. And that's the way I see producing. It's less artistry, you know. Well, I shouldn't say that because I don't want producers to think that I don't think they're artistic, but because I do producers. I think you're all artistic. But for me, it really is about bringing people together that I think would have a wonderful impact on a story, and telling different stories that we haven't heard. I am kind of tired of rehashing the things that we've already seen all the time. So this is a role where I just want to try something different and tell different stories. What about you?
I mean, for me, it's more about, most of the things have been based on books, so I'm in a position where people come and say, we've got this book, or the play, say Rabbit Hole, was a play that I felt passionately about and had to fight like crazy to get it made, and was willing to do so. I mean, it's not something that I'm going, oh, I want to produce lots of things. I actually choose one or two things that I go, okay, and I love being able to say to the author or the playwright, this will get made. And I did that with Leanne Moriarty with Big Little Lies that Reese Witherspoon and I just produced, which was so amazing to be able to go and meet with her and go, the one thing I can tell you is we'll get it made. I said, just let us option your book and we'll get it made. And she was like, okay. And it's that simple. And then as soon as I say that, though, I got to keep my word. So I'm like, this will be made.
And has that process felt different, the fact that that's a series for television? Has that been different from the films that you've produced?
It was amazing because Reese and I went and pitched it, and we had everybody wanting to do it, and then we were able to cast it. In 18 months, we optioned it, got it written, got it into production.
Wow.
It was amazing, and I love that happened that way. And it was 5 roles for women that all of them are great. So, and that, I mean, I've just been watching it because Jean-Marc Vallée directed it, and watching them and like texting Laura Dern going, oh my God, you're good in this. You're so funny, you're so good. Shailene, I mean, to be able to do that and go, everyone's so good in it and the stories are so strong, that's rare. And that's what I feel proud about.
I'm also curious, when we were sitting here, we were getting these chairs, and we were talking about the men sitting in these chairs, and you guys, beforehand were getting all dolled up, and that's sort of like how it goes during award season and Q&As. You get your hair, you get glam or whatever. How do you feel?
They had all
How do you
that.
feel?
They did, trust me. They had it before they left home. They didn't want you
don't let
seeing
anybody
it.
see.
Yeah.
longer than
They don't
us.
want you to see it. They're not going to come with their groomers. They've been
They call it
groomed.
groomers. Yeah, that's right. Which I'm like, that's a funny word. Why do they call it groomers?
So they don't
Sounds
have
like a
to
horse.
admit to wearing makeup.
Exactly.
But so you're okay with the process of, getting glammed up for all of this stuff, or do you feel like, why do we have to go through all of this?
I like it.
I sometimes do wish, though, that we could just come as we are a bit more.
I feel like I was saying that this morning, like I feel like I do that so much. I was like, it's so many times in movies, I feel like I come as I am. And then I watch it and I'm like, oh, well, that's what it's your lot. Like that is what it is. And then you get like people to like really put like beautiful makeup on you and beautiful hair on you, and you're like, well, that's a nice change. Like, I'll take that for a moment. And then, so I kind of enjoy that sort of like interplay between allowing yourself a kind of freedom in your work that somehow is maybe a little bit harder in your life, or it's just nice to have a kind of like balance between the two, to let yourself like really go somewhere in a play or in a movie without a kind of self-consciousness, and then to have people to kind of like reel you back together and make you feel like a better version or like a more presentable version of yourself.
And we do have a choice. We can show up with no hair, no makeup if we wanted, and that's fine.
Alicia Keys is.
Really? But it's interesting, yeah. But it is
Plan that though.
Let me just put the damper on that right now. Some of you girls are all
That'll be the
beautiful
next
without
one we
makeup,
do.
but it just is not that. It's just no. There's a big no on that for me. I'm never going makeupless. I will always have makeup. You'll just think I won't have any on.
But I mean, that's our choice, and it's cool if that's what you want. I mean,
It can also be fun as well, 'cause
Yeah.
you work with a group of people. It's a collaboration. It's not, it's not just you on
and
your
also to
own.
wear
You can
beautiful dress and
yeah,
look gorgeous.
you can
Cool.
Celebrate people's talents.
But it's interesting because it's like, I think now, and it was what we were talking about also, particularly as women get to a certain age, so you girls don't have to worry about this right now, but it's interesting about trying to have the boundaries be more loose. Like you can play within a 10-year span of your age. You can play younger and you can play older. Men have been allowed to do it forever. So why do we pigeonhole women? Because physically now, women can look many different ages and be much older
And the
than they
makeup
are.
really
and look
helps
young.
do that too.
And as long as we support that, and I just did a thing where I did it with Jane Campion, and they were like, we want you to have wild grey hair, and I was like, fab, I'll take it. Put the grey hair on and the things, and older, and then go and do something with Alexander Skarsgård where I've got this young husband and young, and it's nice to fight for that as a woman at this age and go, no, the span can be a decade. So anyway.
Makes her jobs more fun as well. The more variety you
and
get to do, and not
it's
being
possible.
pigeonholed, as you were saying earlier. Not
You
to-
can play older and younger, because just because you're younger doesn't mean you shouldn't have access to be playing an older character if the director wants you because you're the right person for it. And that's what he wants.
Right. Naomi, you went through that firsthand in 3 days, apparently.
Yes, in Moonlight, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Was that challenge? How different were the age spans?
It's going across an age span of, I want to say, like 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
And just in a day, you got to get into 2 decades of a difference.
It's 15.
Okay.
Yes, yeah. No, it was challenging, yeah, but it was also really fun. And the great thing about it was my director never made me feel as though I was rushed. it's crazy. Like now I look at it and I think that was insanity to try and do that in 3 days. But actually at the time, it felt perfectly doable because Barry Jenkins was so relaxed and so easy and so calm and so patient. And he made me feel as though I could do as many takes as I wanted and there was all the time in the world. Meanwhile, he must have been like panicking behind the scenes, like, oh my gosh, you know, but it never felt like that. Speak faster.
And Nimi, your final scene in the film, it's two people really struggling to communicate. Your character, who's been somewhat of a neglectful mother, is attempting to sort of apologize and declare her love to her son. And tell me a little bit about just capturing that scene, because it's a moment when there's a lot, people struggling to communicate, and like, how do you sort of capture people not really getting out what they're trying to say?
Well, it's interesting because Trevante Rhodes, who plays my oldest son, we only met 10 minutes before that scene actually happened. So again, due to the whole time factor. And it was interesting what you were talking about before about rehearsals and that whole process, because I think sometimes not having that time and not having the rehearsals can lead to something quite magical happening, because you're discovering everything with the person you're playing with for the first time. And it feels so fresh and it feels as though anything is possible. And that's definitely what I felt with Trevante. And I think that really added to the intensity of the scene, and also because I was therefore having to really connect with his soul. I knew nothing about this person, you know, as a human being. So I really had to just try and communicate and talk to his soul, and I think that really helped the scene.
And Michelle, in Manchester by the Sea, we had Casey Affleck here for one of our other panels, your co-star, and we were talking about your kind of the emotional climax of the movie, the scene, the two of you talking on the street, and it seemed like two people sort of stepping on their lines, and you actually don't say that much to each other, but he was saying how there was a lot of precision in how it was put together. Like, what was your side of creating that scene?
Yeah, it was a strange scene because it was written very technically, like the lines, it was right next to each other, you know, and the overlaps are very specific, and then like the scene will sort of change course in the middle because somebody says something that somebody then clocks like 2 paragraphs later, and then they respond to it. So it was a very technical. I think that Kenny's dialogue, it has like a feeling of being very naturalistic, but it's actually, you know, each but is like all sort of laid in there. And so it was a funny thing of like a scene that needs a lot of preparation, because you have to like know where you're coming in, and you really have to be listening, and you really, because you're giving the other person cues and you're listening for your cues. So it's very technical, but you also don't want to, like you were saying, the thing that's like that's so different from doing a play is that you're trying to capture like something, like a moment, like the first time that something happens. So it's like that's a difficult balance to strike when you really have to rehearse something like really thoroughly or learn it very technically, and then to like meld it so it gets that kind of you know, happening in the moment kind of quality.
So many people are talking about that scene, and you've said, I think you've told me that you were adamantly not watching this movie and relive it, you know, you don't want to see your performance. Is that difficult to like not see your films and then have to talk about them a lot, or do you remember what you did?
I remember it really well. That scene, doing that scene felt like going to the guillotine, and I remember like every moment, like I remember waking up, I remember like every step out of bed, because I was like, oh, it's that day. You know, there's like those scenes in the movie that you're like, it's coming, it's in 2 weeks, it's in 10 days, it's like countdown. It's not necessarily, I still haven't seen the movie. I want to see the movie, I will see the movie. It's not necessarily like I don't want to see this movie. But I haven't made a lot of movies in the last 3 years, and it's sort of jarring, like the thought of seeing it. There's like a sort of like, when you do a lot of plays, you don't have to look at yourself in the same way. Like you're at such a distance, and and I've really enjoyed that kind of quality of not like that lack of self-consciousness. And I'm also just waiting for the right moment to watch it. Like I don't want to see it at a screening with a lot of people. I want to see it at home. And they won't give me a DVD. I'm sure you can get one. No, they won't give me a DVD. They're like, you can't. I was like, please?
And that's where we're going to have to wrap it up. Ladies, tonight we thank you all for being here. For the Los Angeles Times and The Envelope, I'm Mark Olson.
I'm Amy Kaufman. Thank you guys.
Thank you.